Hey, Grandpa, how does it feel to be history? The cameras were rolling, 4 TikTok pranksters circling an 85-year-old man, looking for cheap laughs. What would happen when they crossed a line they couldn't uncross? But when one of them gave a mocking shove, William Harlow fell. The crack of his head against the table silenced the whole bar. Blood on oak. No one spoke, no one stood up, except Bill. He reached into his pocket, dialed one number. Rich, it's your father. We've got a situation at Mallister's. What would happen in just 30 minutes? 30 minutes later, Cedar Hollow would remember. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And tonight, they'd see exactly how. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. In Cedar Hollow, Texas, life didn't rush. It stretched out slow, like the fields that rolled beyond the edge of town, dusty roads, worn storefronts, and the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was earned. People here valued things that lasted, things built with hands, not hashtags. And right at the heart of town sat Mallister's bar. The sign was faded, the booths had seen better days, but it stood like it always had. That's where you'd find William Bill Harlow every Saturday morning, 85 years old. Retired Marine Corps First Sergeant, the kind of man who didn't care if anyone noticed him. He still showed up, still wiped down every table, still polished the old oak bar like he was keeping a promise. Most folks just nodded when they saw him, some didn't even do that anymore. But for me, Emma Collins, bartender, Cedar Hollow born and raised, Bill was the reason this place still felt honest. He used to own Mallister's back when my daddy brought me here for root beer floats. After his wife passed, Bill kept coming back, not to drink, not to be seen, but to care for what was left. Today felt no different until the front door swung open. 4 young men swaggered in, phones already raised, voices too loud for a room that wasn't theirs. The true Texan squad. They called themselves TikTok pranksters, locally infamous, known for making fun of old-timers, for chasing likes by tearing down what they didn't understand. Their faces were on every screen, but their respect for anything older than last week's trend, non-existent. Morning, folks, the leader, Casey, shouted, arms wide like a ringmaster. Let's help Cedar Hollow go viral, shall we? I felt my stomach tighten. Bill was at his usual spot, near the far wall, methodical, calm, his cloth sliding over the table's surface with a patience none of these boys could fathom. Casey spotted him instantly. Would you look at that? He sneered, angling his phone toward Bill. A living antique, wiping tables. Someone get this man a museum plaque. His buddies laughed, not because it was funny, but because they needed the noise. Bill didn't flinch, didn't even pause. His hand kept moving in slow, deliberate circles, like those words had never touched him. But they touched me, and they weren't done. One of the younger ones, a wiry kid with bleached hair and too much ego, moved in closer, phone held high. Hey, Grandpa, he jeered, how does it feel to be history, still trying to wipe away your own extinction? The laughter was sharper now, edged with cruelty. Around the bar, heads turned away, eyes dropped to phones, pretending not to see. Cowards. Even the new manager, some out-of-town investor type, just slipped into the back, too busy counting profits to count character. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but my feet wouldn't move, because when a crowd decides silence is safer, standing up feels like standing alone. Bill, he just kept wiping, but Casey wasn't getting his content. Let's give Grandpa a hand, boys, he smirked. And then it happened, a shove, not hard, but sharp enough. Bill staggered, his hip clipped the corner of a chair, his body folded in slow motion, collapsing to the worn wooden floor. His head struck the edge of a table on the way down. I heard the thud, so did everyone else. Blood welded his temple, a thin, dark line tracing down his cheek. The room went still. Even the pranksters stopped laughing, but their phones didn't stop recording. Casey crouched low, camera trained on Bill's face, as if this humiliation was his masterpiece. Still standing strong, Grandpa, he whispered, mocking. Bill didn't answer. He didn't have to. With the same steady hands that had once held the line in Korea, he pushed himself upright, knees creaking, shoulders straightening. He took a breath, wiped his brow, and reached into his pocket, not for a fist, not for a weapon, but for a phone. He tapped a single number. The line barely rang once. Rich, he said, voice low, firm, like it had been every day of my childhood gym classes. It's your father. We've got a situation at Mallister's. That was all. No anger, no complaint, no drama, just the facts, just the truth. He ended the call, pocketed the phone, picked up his cloth from where it had fallen, and with the same quiet dignity as always resumed wiping the table. The blood on his face didn't matter, the boys still holding their phones didn't matter, but to me it was a gut punch, because in that moment, Cedar Hollow failed him. We all did. We let noise drown out respect. We let a man who had given his strength to this country be treated like a prop for cheap views, and no one said a word. I felt shame burn my throat, my fingers curled around the edge of the bar, nails digging into wood. But Bill, he just kept wiping, like he always did, because some people don't fight back with fists, some people fight back by standing exactly where they are, by refusing to be moved. Outside, life kept on. Inside, the silence felt like judgment, for us, not for him. And as I watched that old man, with his back straight and his cloth moving slow and steady, one thought cut through the noise in my head. Some lines you don't cross. Tonight they did, and something told me tonight they'd learn. It took 30 minutes for Cedar Hollow to feel the weight of its own silence. For 30 minutes, Bill Harlow wiped down tables as if nothing had happened. Blood still glistened at his temple, his cloth moved steady, unfazed, and for 30 minutes, not a soul in Malisters made a sound. The true Texan squad retreated to their corner, muttering, casting glances at their screens, but the swagger had dulled. The air felt heavier now, thicker. I stood behind the bar, hands trembling around a dish rag, waiting for anything to happen. Then we heard it, the low, unmistakable rumble of engines, not the rowdy growl of pickup trucks. This was different, deeper, measured, authoritative. I moved to the front window. Outside, a convoy of matte black SUVs rolled down Main Street. No sirens, no flashy lights, just raw presence. When they stopped in front of Malisters, the street seemed to exhale. Doors opened, men stepped out, uniforms crisp, dark, no patches for show, no names displayed, but you could tell these weren't weekend reservists. These were the real thing, and at their center walked a man who carried more weight in his silence than most could with a parade. Colonel Richard Harlow. You didn't need an introduction to know who he was, his posture alone said enough. The same way Bill stood tall, Richard moved with a quiet gravity, each step precise, each glance sharp. He pushed open the bar's door, no rush, no drama, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His gaze swept the space, pausing briefly on Bill, who stood as always by his table, cloth in hand, blood forgotten. Then his eyes found the group of pranksters in the corner. No one else mattered, no greetings, no small talk, just a question dropped into the air like a blade. Who put his hands on First Sergeant William Harlow? The room held its breath. The boys said nothing. Casey tried to lean back, feigning indifference, but his fingers twitched against the phone in his lap, still recording, still hoping for views. Richard didn't repeat himself, he didn't need to. With a nod, one of his men stepped forward. A small projector was unhooked from his gear, powered on with clinical efficiency. The far wall of Malisters became a screen, and there it was, the security footage, no edits, no filters, just the cold truth. We watched in silence as Casey and his crew crowded Bill, the sneer, the taunts, the shove, Bill's body hitting the ground, the blood, the laughter. No one could look away, not now. When the clip ended, Richard's voice returned, low, precise. You don't need to know who a man is to reveal who you are. It wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than any shout could. One by one, heads lowered, patrons shifted in their seats, guilt hung thick in the air. Even the bartender across from me, who hadn't said a word when Bill was shoved, found something interesting to stare at on the floor. But Richard wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Casey's table, boots clicking softly against the wood. You struck a man because you thought he was weak, he said. That's all I need to know about you. Casey opened his mouth, probably to deflect, to joke, to twist the narrative, but the words never came, because standing in front of him wasn't a viral clip, it was consequence, the kind that doesn't refresh with a swipe. Behind Richard, more soldiers fanned out, not aggressively, not to intimidate, simply positioning themselves with a discipline that made the pranksters visibly shrink. Then came the police, local officers arriving late, as they often did when real courage was required, but this time, they had no choice but to act. Body cameras rolling, they approached the true Texan squad. On your feet, the lead officer said. The pranksters stumbled up, voices rising in protest. This is a misunderstanding, we were just filming, it was a joke, man. But the handcuffs clicking shut said otherwise. One of them, a lanky kid with shaky hands, actually tried to keep streaming, his phone raised even as the cuffs locked around his wrists. Bro, we're getting arrested live. He laughed, breathless. This is going to blow up. But his grin wavered when Richard turned to face him. No, son, this isn't going to blow up. He pointed at the wall where their cruelty had been laid bare. This is going to be remembered. The officers led them out, their phones still blinking, still desperate for attention, but the only attention they received was the weight of a community that had finally decided enough was enough. I watched them go, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small, I didn't feel helpless, because the silence in Malisters had shifted. It wasn't cowardice anymore, it was reverence. Bill hadn't said a word through it all, he didn't need to, but I watched his eyes, not angry, not vindictive, just tired. A sadness that went deeper than bruises, the kind that comes from watching a world forget what words like respect used to mean. Richard approached his father. There was no embrace, no dramatics, just a simple exchange of nods, the kind of gesture that spoke volumes between men who understood each other without speaking. I felt something loosen in my chest, because tonight justice didn't come in the form of viral outrage, it came quietly, with boots on wood, with truth projected on a wall, with a father answering his father's call, not out of anger, but out of honor. And as those boys were driven away, live streams forgotten, hashtags useless, I realized something simple but profound. For once, silence had chosen the right side, and Cedar Hollow had witnessed it. When the doors of Malisters swung shut behind the police, no one moved. For a heartbeat, the bar held its breath, then the crowd stirred, quietly, cautiously, as if stepping out of a trance, like they were walking into a moment they didn't quite deserve, but knew they needed to witness. I followed them outside. The evening had settled into that soft Texas dusk, the sky blushed gold, then deepened to the kind of indigo that made you remember the world could still be beautiful, and right there on the cracked sidewalk of Cedar Hollow's main street. History was standing tall. Colonel Richard Harlow faced his father. His boots were planted, shoulders squared, eyes level. Slowly, deliberately, Richard brought his hand up to his brow and rendered a salute. No cameras, no speeches, just a son standing at attention for the man who had taught him what that gesture meant. Behind him, the special operations team moved in unison. One by one, they formed a line. One by one, they raised their hands, not as a formality, not as a show, but as a living wall of respect for William Harlow, for what he stood for what he refused to let be erased. And as I watched, that lump in my throat returned, heavy, real, because this wasn't content, this wasn't for clicks, this was honor, and it rang louder in silence than any trending soundbite ever could. Around me, Cedar Hollow gathered, farmers, teachers, retirees, people who had known Bill for decades, people who had forgotten, maybe, how much they owed to men like him. But tonight, they remembered. Even the teenagers, ones who might have scrolled past videos mocking old men like Bill, stood still. One boy, no more than 17, tugged his earbuds out, letting them dangle against his chest. He looked at Bill, then, almost shyly, he dipped his head. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Of memories, uninvited, surfaced in my mind. I saw myself at 16, standing awkwardly in the high school gym, clutching a volleyball I was too scared to serve. Other kids had snickered. I remember the burn of embarrassment, but Bill had been there. Coach Harlow, we called him. He hadn't barked orders, he hadn't humiliated me into action, he had simply walked over, knelt to my level, and said in that steady, gravel-warm voice, "It Collins, standing tall starts from the inside, you square your shoulders, the world follows." The day I served the ball tonight, watching him stand with that same quiet strength, I realized some lessons don't age. Richard lowered his salute, stepped closer. Their voices were too soft for the crowd, but I could see their faces. Bill's, lined with time, yet unwavering. Richard's, carved with a soldier's stoicism, but beneath it, a son's respect. Then Bill spoke. "I didn't call you because of pride, son, I called because silence hurts more than fists." Richard nodded, a simple, solemn acknowledgement. The weight of that truth hung between them, and somehow, between all of us, because every person on that sidewalk knew exactly what he meant. We'd let the noise take over, we'd watched decency get shoved aside for entertainment, and we hadn't said a damn thing until now. Now we stood together, not clapping, not shouting, just standing, the way Bill had always done. There was a stillness to the air, but it wasn't empty, it was filled with the quiet realization that Cedar Hollow had failed and failed itself. But tonight was different. Tonight, a man's dignity had been defended, not by outrage, not by scandal, but by the simple act of showing up, by a son who understood that some battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with presence. And as I watched that line of soldiers holding their salute, I felt it deep in my bones. This was the real viral moment, not filmed, not posted, but imprinted in the hearts of everyone present. Slowly, Bill turned to face us. No speech, no raised fist, just a quiet look that said more than words ever could. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reproach, it was a reminder of who we had been, of who we still could be. The special ops team held their formation until Richard gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. With precision born of discipline, they lowered their hands, but the respect remained thick in the air, and Cedar Hollow stood straighter because of it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Main Street, I realized something else. Tonight wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about shame, it was about course correction. A small town remembering the weight of a simple word, honor, and we didn't need to scroll to find it. We were living it, one silent apology at a time. 1 week, that's all it took for Cedar Hollow to remember who it was. 1 week after that night on Main Street, small things started to shift, quiet things, but real. It began with a new sign hung right above Mallister's front door, hand-carved, simple, unmistakable, built by hands, protected by honor. No corporate logos, no flashy slogans, just words that meant something. People noticed, they paused, and when they stepped inside, something in the way they walked changed. Too, maybe it was respect, maybe it was guilt. Either way, it was long overdue. At the high school, they started a new program, not because of some district mandate, because people asked for it. Veterans, many of them friends of Bill, came to speak with students, not about war stories, not about medals, but about what it means to stand tall, to see someone being mocked and not look away. Bill was the first speaker. He didn't bring notes, didn't prepare a slideshow. He just stood at the front of the old gym, the same one where he used to coach kids like me, and told them what he knew. "I've seen bullies," he said, "in every uniform you can imagine, but I've also seen quiet courage, the kind that doesn't trend, the kind you have to choose." The kids listened, not because he demanded it, but because his presence filled the space louder than any microphone could. Even some of the pranksters showed up. They sat in the back, no phones, no snickering, and when it came time for questions, one of them, a lanky boy named Drew, stood up. "I was wrong, sir," he said. "I didn't think about what I was doing, about what I was saying." Bill didn't lecture him, didn't shame him, he just nodded. "That's the first right thing you've done, now go do more." It wasn't a dramatic redemption arc, but it was honest, and in a world obsessed with perfect apologies, that honesty felt rare. Drew and two of his friends started showing up at Mallister's on Saturdays, not to film, to learn. They asked Bill how to properly wipe down the oak tables, how to treat wood with care, how to notice Things others overlooked, I watched them week after week, hands clumsy at first, but improving, learning respect not from a lecture, but from doing the work. One Saturday, as Drew struggled with a stubborn water stain, he muttered, "Guess this is what they mean by cleaning up your mistakes." Bill gave him a rare, thin smile, only if you don't expect applause for it. Around town, people started talking differently, not louder, just with more weight behind their words. At the diner, at the feed store, even at City Hall, folks remembered that a community's values aren't set by algorithms, they're set by actions, every choice, every day. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Malisters found itself again, not as a trendy dive bar, but as a place that stood for something. I saw it firsthand, the way old-timers sat a little taller, the way younger folks looked around before speaking, as if suddenly aware their words mattered. Respect didn't become a viral challenge. It became a lived habit. One evening, as the late sun painted Cedar Hollow in honey gold, Bill pushed open the door to Malisters. Same time, same walk, but something was different. The moment he crossed the threshold, every person in that bar stood up. No one said a word, no one needed to. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't for show, it was gratitude, distilled into a simple, unified gesture. I stood behind the bar, a dish rag in hand, watching it unfold. For a breath, time seemed to hold still. Bill paused, his eyes sweeping the room, catching every gaze. He didn't smile, but his posture straightened, as if the respect had found its way back to him. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but this time it wasn't shame, it was pride, the quiet kind, the sturdy kind. And in that moment, I realized something simple and true. Tonight, no one filmed it, and yet, it was the truest viral moment Cedar Hollow ever had. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.